It was a cold, stormy night when a retired pilot named Captain Arthur stumbled across an old, rusted airplane in an abandoned hangar. The plane, a vintage Lockheed Electra, had been untouched for decades. Stories about this plane whispered through the aviation world, tales of passengers who vanished midair and pilots who were never seen again. It was known as the Whisperer *. Captain Arthur, a man of logic and facts, laughed at the rumors. "It's just an old plane," he muttered, brushing off the cobwebs as he examined the cockpit. The controls were surprisingly intact, though the dials and gauges looked odd, almost ancient. A faded logbook lay on the pilot's seat. Its pages were blank except for one cryptic line scrawled in red ink. "Do not fly when the clock strikes 12. *. Arthur shrugged, believing it was just a prank by the previous owner. But as he flipped through the logbook, he felt a chill creep up his spine. Strange symbols and numbers were scratched into the corners of the pages, coordinates, maybe. Or warnings, he couldn't tell. Ignoring the eerie vibe, Arthur decided to restore the plane. Something about it fascinated him, as if it were calling out to him. Over the next few weeks, he worked tirelessly, fixing the engine, polishing the exterior, and testing the systems. Oddly, he often felt like he was being watched, but every time he looked over his shoulder, there was nothing there. Finally, on the night of the first test flight, Arthur invited two of his old friends, Jack and Emily, both aviation enthusiasts, to join him. They met at the airstrip at 11:30 p.m., laughing and joking about the haunted plane. The storm had cleared, leaving a full moon that cast an eerie glow on the sleek, restored aircraft. As they climbed aboard, Emily hesitated. "This plane gives me the creeps," she said, her voice shaky. Jack teased her, but even he felt uneasy. The atmosphere was heavy, like the air inside the plane was thicker than outside. At exactly 11:55 p.m., they powered up the engine. The hum of the propellers echoed through the silent night. Arthur noticed the dials on the dashboard flickering, though the plane was in perfect condition. He tapped one of the gauges, but it remained erratic. By 11:58 p.m., they were in the air. The moonlit clouds looked almost peaceful, but something was wrong. The radio started to crackle, emitting faint whispers. At first, they thought it was static, but the voices grew louder, speaking in a language none of them could understand. Then, at the stroke of midnight, the plane suddenly jerked violently. The lights flickered, and the whispers turned into chilling screams. Arthur gripped the controls, trying to steady the plane, but it was as if something unseen was fighting against him. Jack shouted, "What's happening?" Emily screamed, pointing out the window. Through the clouds, they saw faint silhouettes, figures floating in midair, their hollow eyes staring straight at them. The logbook on the dashboard flew open on its own. That cryptic line, *, "Do not fly when the clock strikes 12, *, was glowing bright red. Arthur realized too late that the rumors were true. This plane wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. The screams from the radio filled the cockpit, making Emily cover her ears as tears streamed down her face. Jack frantically tried to switch off the radio, but the voices only grew louder, their distorted tones now blending with cries for help. Arthur fought to control the plane as it trembled violently. "Stay calm," he shouted, though his own hands shook on the controls. The silhouettes outside the plane moved closer, their forms clearer now, shadowy figures with long, claw-like fingers and empty, glowing eyes. They weren't floating aimlessly, they were circling the plane. Emily gasped, pointing again. There, trying to get in. Through the windows, the shadows pressed against the glass. Their hollow faces twisted into unnatural grins, and faint tapping noises began to echo throughout the cabin. The tapping grew louder, like fingers drumming urgently, as though the figures were testing the barrier between their world and the passengers inside. "Arthur, do something," Jack yelled, his voice breaking. Arthur stared at the controls, searching for answers, but the instruments made no sense. The compass spun wildly, the altimeter blinked random numbers, and the fuel gauge showed the tank empty, even though he'd filled it just hours ago. Suddenly, the plane lurched downward. Everyone was thrown from their seats. Emily clung to her chair, screaming, while Jack hit his head against the cabin wall, leaving a streak of blood. Arthur scrambled back to the cockpit, grabbing the controls as the plane nosedived through the clouds. The shadowy figures outside vanished into the darkness, but the whispers returned, only this time, they were inside the plane. Who's there?" Emily stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The air inside the cabin grew cold, and a thick mist began to seep out of the floor, swirling around their feet. Jack, holding his bleeding head, froze as he saw something move in the fog, a shape crawling toward them. "Arthur, there's something in here," he whispered, his voice trembling. Arthur didn't look back. He focused on the controls, desperate to regain stability. "Hold on, we're going to land this thing." But deep down, he wasn't sure if they would. Emily's screams shattered his focus. He turned and saw her pointing at the mist. It wasn't just crawling anymore. It was rising, forming into a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes. "Why did you fly this plane?" A voice boomed, echoing through the cabin. It wasn't coming from any one direction, it was everywhere. Arthur froze, his heart pounding. Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, it pointed a long, skeletal finger at the dashboard, where the glowing line in the logbook now flickered like fire. "You ignored the warning. Asterisk." The plane shook violently again, and the lights flickered. Arthur gritted his teeth, pushing the throttle forward, trying to climb higher. But no matter what he did, the plane felt heavier, as if something was pulling it down. The shadow figure stepped closer to Emily, who was paralyzed with fear. Jack tried to stand but was slammed back into his seat by an invisible force. "You were warned," the figure said again, its voice colder this time. "You cannot escape what belongs to us." Suddenly, the figure vanished, and the whispers stopped. The mist cleared, and for a brief moment, the plane stabilized. "We're okay," Arthur whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But before they could even take a breath, the radio crackled again. This time, a new voice spoke, clear, calm, and chilling. "You've entered our airspace. You'll never leave." Outside the cockpit window, the clouds parted, revealing something unimaginable. Below them was no longer the Earth they knew. It was a vast, endless void of darkness, dotted with faint, flickering lights, like lost souls trapped in the abyss. Arthur realized with horror that they weren't flying in their world anymore. The plane plunged into the dark void, surrounded by flickering lights that resembled trapped souls. Arthur gripped the controls, trying to steady the aircraft, but it felt as if something was pulling them deeper. The mist returned, swirling around their feet, and the whispers grew louder. Emily sobbed, her voice trembling. "Arthur, where are we? What is this place?" Arthur's gaze stayed fixed on the void below. "I don't know, but we have to get out of here." Suddenly, the radio crackled, and a cold, sinister voice echoed through the cabin. "You've entered our world. You will never leave." Asterisk. Jack, still clutching his bleeding head, stumbled to the back of the cabin. "There has to be a way out of this. Arthur, do something." Arthur's hands shook as he tried to control the plane. The instruments on the dashboard spun erratically, and the compass pointed in random directions. The mist thickened, forming shapes, shadowy figures with hollow, glowing eyes. One of the figures whispered, "You were warned. Now you are ours." Asterisk. The plane jolted violently, throwing Emily to the floor. She screamed as one of the shadows reached for her, its long, claw-like fingers brushing against her arm. The cold burned her skin, and she scrambled back, terrified. Arthur grabbed the logbook, his mind racing. He flipped through the pages, desperate for answers. The strange symbols seemed to glow, shifting and rearranging. A single line stood out. "To escape, find the origin." Asterisk. Arthur shouted, "The origin. That's how we get out of here." Emily cried, "What origin? How do we find it?" The plane shuddered again, and the shadows outside pressed against the windows. Arthur noticed the compass had stopped spinning and was pointing toward a fixed direction. "That's it," he muttered. Gripping the controls, Arthur pushed the plane forward, following the compass. The whispers grew louder, and the figures clawed at the windows, but Arthur refused to stop. Suddenly, a bright light appeared ahead. As the plane surged toward it, the shadows screamed and vanished, leaving the cabin in silence. They had escaped the void, for now. Arthur and Emily sat in stunned silence as the plane emerged from the void. The stars were visible again, and the familiar hum of the engines filled the cabin. But the terror of the shadows and whispers still lingered. Emily broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Arthur, is it over? Did we escape?" Arthur didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the logbook in his lap. The symbols inside had stopped glowing but seemed darker, etched deeper into the pages. A new line of text had appeared. "The curse is broken, for now." Asterisk. His stomach sank. "I don't think this is over," he muttered. The radio crackled to life, and the sinister voice that had haunted them in the void returned, colder than ever. "You think you're safe. The Whisperer doesn't let go so easily." Asterisk. The plane jolted, and the compass spun wildly. Emily gasped, gripping her seat. "What's happening?" Arthur tightened his grip on the controls. "It's not done with us. We need to land now." As the plane descended toward a nearby airstrip, the cabin temperature dropped again, and the mist began creeping in, swirling around their feet. The whispers returned, faint but growing louder. Arthur fought the urge to panic. The landing was rough, the tires screeching against the tarmac, but they managed to stop the plane. Arthur and Emily scrambled out, their breaths visible in the freezing air. The airstrip was eerily quiet, shrouded in a light fog. "We need to destroy the plane," Arthur said suddenly. Emily stared at him. "Destroy it? How? And why?" Arthur held up the logbook. "This plane is cursed. It's not just a machine, it's a vessel for something evil. If we don't destroy it, someone else could find it and unleash this nightmare all over again." Reluctantly, Emily nodded. Together, they found a fuel canister in the hangar and doused the plane in gasoline. As they worked, the shadows appeared again, crawling along the edges of the runway. The whispers grew louder, angry and desperate. "You cannot destroy us. The curse will never end." Asterisk. Ignoring the voices, Arthur lit a match and threw it at the plane. Flames engulfed it instantly, and the shadows screamed, their forms dissolving into the fire. As the plane burned, the mist cleared, and the whispers faded into silence. But as Arthur turned to leave, he noticed the logbook lying on the ground, untouched by the flames. On its cover, new words glowed faintly. "The Whisperer never truly dies." Asterisk. Arthur and Emily stood in the cold airstrip, watching the flames consume the cursed plane. The fire crackled loudly, casting eerie shadows on the ground. For a moment, everything was still, and they let themselves believe the nightmare was finally over. Emily shivered, rubbing her arms. "Do you think that's it? Is it really gone?" Arthur exhaled deeply, his eyes fixed on the burning wreckage. "I hope so. The plane is destroyed. That's what the logbook said we had to do." But as they turned to leave, Arthur froze. The logbook lay on the ground near the hangar door, untouched by the flames. A cold chill ran down his spine as he approached it. Emily stayed back, her face pale. Arthur picked up the logbook, his hands trembling. A single line of glowing text had appeared on the cover. "The vessel is gone, but the curse remains." Asterisk. "What does that mean?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Arthur could respond, the air around them grew unnaturally cold. A low hum filled the airstrip, and the fog thickened once more, swirling around their feet. Arthur and Emily backed away as the ground beneath the hangar began to rumble. Suddenly, the shadows returned, twisting and shifting into grotesque figures with glowing eyes. Their voices merged into a chilling harmony. "You cannot destroy us. The Whisperer is eternal." Asterisk. Emily screamed, grabbing Arthur's arm. "We destroyed the plane. What else do they want?" Arthur's mind raced as he flipped through the logbook, searching for answers. The pages were blank except for one final line. "The Whisperer lives within those who enter its domain." Asterisk. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. "It's us," he said, his voice hollow. "The curse didn't die with the plane. It latched onto us." Emily's eyes filled with tears. No, that can't be true." The shadows closed in, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. Arthur grabbed Emily's hand and shouted, "Run!" They sprinted across the airstrip, the shadows pursuing them. The whispers echoed in their ears, taunting them. "You cannot escape what you've become." Asterisk. As they reached their car, Arthur threw the logbook onto the ground and slammed the door shut. They sped away, leaving the airstrip and the burning plane behind. But as they drove into the night, the whispers lingered in the air. In the backseat, unnoticed by either of them, the logbook reappeared, resting silently, waiting for its next move. The curse was far from over. The end, or is it the beginning?